Okay, we can get started now. So as usual, we're going to start with the announcements. I'm going to pass it off to Heidi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you guys for coming. As you may know, today we'll be presenting ESG and real estate. And for March 1st, which is next week, Tuesday, we have a SNCC collab with a guest speaker, Eric Frankel from Green Street. On March 3rd, which is the next Thursday, we have a collab with OMS, which is the Operations Management Society Club, and more info for that is to come. And on March 10th, we have a guest speaker, Brandon Yamada, who is an analyst at MetLife, and he is a CPP alumni. He was a past E-board member at REA. So it'll be really interesting to see what he has done after graduating from CPP. Next slide. If you haven't already, follow us on our social media platforms, on our Instagram, and follow us or join our Slack group, which is where we will be contacting the groups and giving updates more frequently. And if you want to talk to the eBoard members individually, please contact us through Slack. And if you, you could take a picture of our Linktree QR code, and that will bring you directly to all of the links.
Okay, for our REA merchandise, if you're interested in becoming an official REA member, please Venmo at the bottom Talia. You can see how to spell her name and include your name within the Venmo, your CPP email, and just make sure you also have your full name included in as well.
So with one of our partnerships with Crow Inland Empire, their purpose is advancing women in the commercial real estate industry, and they offer a variety of benefits for students, and we highly recommend for you guys to sign up. One of those benefits is the $5,000 scholarship, and this is for everyone in Crew, not just women. And also for those that attended the WLI event last night, if you showed up and you participated, don't forget to send in your resume and look out for the informational interviews. And also be on the lookout for a scholarship link that they talked about last night. And if you need more information on that, please reach out to us and we can send you a link.
Before we begin, we have a job posting from Commonwealth Land Title Insurance. Commonwealth is a member of Fidelity National Financial Incorporated, and they represent the nation's largest group of title companies and title insurance underwriters that, they collectively issue more title insurance policies than any other title company in the US. We're actually planning on having the head, Crystal Levis of the Ontario office, join us in a few weeks to talk about, her career and what she's been doing. But right now, she has opened up a job called the Commercial Sales Executive. And so she's just looking for a recent or soon-to-be graduate who's interested in pursuing a career in title insurance. Once again, this place is located in Ontario, California, and I believe Martin is dropping her email. You just have to say, I'm here, I'm from REA. I learned about your commercial sales exec position, and you have to send your resume in, and she'll look through it and contact you later to have an interview or something with you. And before we begin our presentation, we kind of wanted to go over REA Netiquette. We really appreciate all of our members, and we're always so happy to have you here and all the questions that you bring to us. Without you guys, REA wouldn't exist, right? We wouldn't have a meeting without you guys. And so just some things, to guide us through this tumultuous time of COVID and, Zoom online learning, is we just wanted to bring up a few points. So number one is during the meeting, we would appreciate if everyone could keep questions and comments till the end. But also if you want to have your questions and comments talked about, put them in the chat. This will ensure that, if with any guest speakers, it's not just us this week, but with any guest speakers we can go through the whole entire presentation. They have a lot of information like chock-filled information that they want to give to us, and we want to make sure you guys get the most out of every single meeting we have. So just, keep comments and questions till the end, or just use the chat function so we can go through the slides and everything. And then for afterwards, for our Q&A, we highly recommend everyone use the raise hand function. And also, just so we know who raised their hand, we can get to you guys and ensure that everyone has their time to ask a question or talk to the guest speaker. And I get if people don't want to have their video on or talk. Zoom fatigue is very real. So once again, use the chat function to relay any questions, any comments, and anyone on the e-board will make sure that your question and comment will get answered. So yeah, like those are just the three main things we want to just keep in mind so that we can flow through the presentation properly. But without further ado, now we'll move on to real estate and its impact on climate, and how does ESG play a role into this. So we're gonna start into diving into ESG, because we feel like ESG is kind of like a buzzword that's used a lot, right? We hear it everywhere. We hear companies talk about it all the time, but do we really know what ESG stands for? And what are things that come with implementing ESG into companies? So the first step is, what does ESG stand for? So the first part is environmental, and that's going to be, climate change, carbon footprint, water conservation, renewable energy, and safe disposal of water, and so much more. And to make this easier, I'm going to use the example of an architecture firm. So with an architecture firm, in an environmental aspect, they're going to think about, when I'm building this property, what type of renewable energy am I using? Am I using any, if at all? Like, am I using any to begin with? And also, like, for example, safe disposal of waste. If I have a bunch of waste that's come from this property, am I disposing it properly through proper channels, or am I just throwing it into the landfill? The next part is social. So that's going to be, human issues and company cultures. That's going to be the treatment of employees that include reasonable wages, proper benefits, personal development, and also on top of that, ethical sourcing. So to carry on with that example, ethical sourcing, as an architect or as someone who's a part of this project, are we sourcing materials like wood or tiling and stuff like that are we sourcing it ethically, and are we sourcing it properly? When we have contractors on the set, are we offering them proper wages and just the basic human needs that they need to properly function, running bathrooms, proper times to take rest, and much more. And last part is governance. So this talks about the company itself, and how is the management caring for stakeholders regardless of the stake they have in the company. Incentive-based compensation that drives shareholder returns. And something that's very, very prominent in companies today is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, it's important to have diverse minds in a company, but it's also important to include everyone. So in a company, you have to make sure, am I including, several races? Am I ensuring that I'm not excluding anyone based on that, based on their ability, am I being ableist or something like that? Like those are things that go into diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is also part of ESG. Next, we have the ESG caveats. So with something as great as ESG, it does not imply financially sound investments. And there are three things that we have to keep in mind to kind of get into the ESG aspect. So number one is, discovery of socially responsible investment opportunities. And that leads into, evaluation using traditional valuation methods. And, as real estate majors and finance majors, any major actually, and taking real estate courses, we know that when we value companies, or we value, sorry about that if you guys heard that, but if you value homes, every home is different. $1 million home in Houston, Texas is going to be much different from $1 million home in San Francisco, California. So we use those traditional valuation methods to properly understand, is the project worth it, or is the home worth it? And that's the same thing with ESG investment opportunities. And as we'll see later in the presentation, with number 3, sustainability will be unavoidable in the future, and those valuations are going to include ESG because of regulatory industry forces. Next, we're going to talk about ESG in real estate itself. And that's going to start with, what are the types that we can see? And so the three main types is one, real estate investment trusts. So if you guys don't know what REITs are, they trade like stocks, and some of them can invest in renewable infrastructure. For example, data centers that commit to renewable energy goals. Others can invest in the planning and actual construction of, new buildings using renewable energy. Another part of that is sourcing. So number one, material acquisition and transport. Is it being ethically sourced and is it being ethically transported? The second part is, construction. Is that based on current and future renewable energy? And also compensation. Is that aligned with investors' interest? The first and last bullet point, we have to understand that, ESG principles stipulate that these sources need to be as local as possible. So are we getting our labor or, our contractors locally, or are we sourcing them from outside? Are we thinking about, our parts? Are they coming from, within the US or from within the local community, or do we have to use a lot of CO2 emissions to bring them here? And lastly, properties. So this can talk about something as simple as appliances, like high efficiency appliances and smart devices. So an example of a smart device is like light switches. If you're in, there's light switches that check to see if you're in the room. If they don't sense movement, they immediately shut down the lights. That's a sign of a smart device and, energy conservation. And so those are things that can increase the longevity of, ESG and just sustainability in real estate. Next thing we want to talk about is this interesting fact that, buildings are responsible for 40% of energy consumption and 36% of CO2 emissions. And now you're thinking like, okay, that's 40% and 36%. That's not going even past half of 100, right? But the thing is that within that, 75% of buildings that are out here today are not energy efficient. And 90% of today's buildings are also going to still be in use by 2050. So what that shows us is that although, designing future projects around sustainability and ESG is important, improving current existing buildings to be more energy efficient plays a huge role in achieving, energy efficiency goals by 2050, or just making, future generations like have a better place to stay. With that, we go into, the phases of a building. And like I mentioned before, the average building is intended to last 50 years, but they often last much longer. Like how many monuments do we go to, or how many, like historical buildings do we go to that are still running today and are like hundreds of years old? And so I really like the design on this, the funnel on the side, because what that shows is that the phases of a building, the material and whatever we can reuse starts to get smaller and smaller. So it starts off with the design phase. That's design and construction is where we can make the most effort and changes, because that's where, ideation comes from. We can choose our designs to be more energy efficient and use more renewable energy or just more efficient materials. And in the construction, we're actually implementing that. What we do in design and construction fixes what can happen in usage, renovation, and demolition. Once we get to the demolition phase, once we break down that company or that building, there's not a lot of things left that can be reused again. But if we think about that from the beginning, we can, increase how much we can reuse again at the demolition phase. And now I'm going to pass it off to Martin, who's going to continue our presentation and give us a few examples. So here you go, Martin.
Hi, everyone. So like we mentioned before in the funnel example, the most important step in achieving ESG goals is in the design stage. Efficiency is significantly related to the decisions taken at that stage. As a result, regulations have been enacted that set minimum energy performance requirements, like increased proportions of bio-based materials used in construction, materials like wood, clay, wool, and straw. They must also be available as locally as possible. And this is just to reduce like the carbon footprint of transporting materials across since they are rather bulky. During construction, there's also the use of modular construction techniques that ensure on-site safety and provide the ability to produce energy on-site via solar panels, heat pumps, and heat networks. Like we mentioned before, Each phase is like a funnel, with our design and construction part having the most impact on whether or not we meet our sustainability goals. For example, the decisions we make in our design phase tremendously impact what can be salvaged in the demolition stage. So here we have an example of what can be done when ESG is designed from the ground up, in the sense that we have a new development called the smart city. Smart cities refers to infrastructure initiatives for urban areas that are designed with new technological innovations from the ground up. These can be viewed as data-centric approaches to the efficient management and organization of infrastructure. The methods by which smart cities are run allow ESG guidelines to span across the entire city, such as community services and resources, better, more efficient transportation systems, improved communication networks, and the optimization of energy consumption, water supply, crime detection, and waste disposal. An example of a smart city is Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Dubai is innovative in several sectors: transportation, tourism, housing, energy, and security. For transportation, they developed the first hyperloop between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. In terms of tourism, an eco-resort called Project Oasis provides a sustainable complex in the middle of the desert. For housing, they have a project called Project Martian City, which is aimed at building housing in the desert for 600,000 people to see if Mars colonization will be feasible. For energy, they are using their vast solar resources to build a mega solar park with the aim of making them a green energy producer. And for security, they are developing and deploying self-driving police cars and the use of robotics to maintain safety in the city. Okay, so next we have usage. Efficiency in the use of buildings focuses mainly on achieving net zero emissions in terms of facility use. This can be achieved through significant renovation, renewable sources of energy, and green energy purchasing. One thing to know, however, as mentioned before, is that efficiency results are significantly related to decisions taken at the design and planning stage, but plenty of things can be done after those phases. So for example, buildings should be used for as long as possible under the assumption that the building has good efficiency. But another solution in the absence of good efficiency is to find another use for the building if major renovations or adaptations are not feasible. An alternative use is to use older buildings that can be used or renovated as storage spaces. Okay, so regulatory frameworks. Regulations are driving the industry towards more sustainable and transparent strategies. One of them is the Paris Agreement. To comply with the Paris Agreement, the global average building energy intensity per square meter must shrink by at least 30% by 2030. Another regulatory framework is the EU Green Deal. This requires the renovation wave to achieve higher efficiency targets. By 2030, 35 million buildings should be renovated. They are also implementing a new sustainable finance taxonomy that includes both financial and non-financial reporting directives. These are things like disclosures of capital expenditures and operation expenditures derived from construction, renovation, acquisition, or ownership of buildings. There is also an investor demand for sustainability performance disclosures that are increasing. Competitive pressure is increasing on traditional funds from green fund offerings. Traditional funds may suffer from reputational damage if real estate investment managers do not implement sustainable strategies for their future business. And green marketing opportunities present themselves, but without real conceptualized plans involving shifting the entire organization's focus, it may backfire because investors will see through the spin. Okay, so now that we've talked about what ESG is and its impact on real estate, now we ask ourselves, what are the next steps in implementing them? So strategy and management. There are two types of carbon footprints related to buildings. One of them is called operational, which comes from the operational aspects of the building, and embodied, which comes from the construction of the building. Recommended actions are the adoption of energy performance tools, systems, and standards of enabling the evaluation, monitoring, and energy management of the building. Investors need to understand how the identification and assessment of climate-related risks is integrated into risk management processes. Regulatory and emerging requirements, as well as other relevant factors related to climate change, should be considered. Things like financial exposures related to greenhouse gas emissions, energy consumption, and other risks like water scarcity and vulnerability of properties to extreme weather events. Need for measurement of key business indicators and forecasting future trends related to climate change and energy factors will detect risks of significant costs and of constraints to service capacity. And for the value chain, evaluation of ESG plans requires analysis of ESG ambitions. Does the real estate investment manager even want to sell and manage ESG products? Why or why not? Does the manager want to act solely as an adopter, or does the company aspire a pioneering role? In the sense that, do managers just want to be followers, or do they want to be proactive and come up with new strategies in order to gain competitive advantages? Okay, and this one's pretty important, the sustainable value and tax governance. Portfolio and brand value itself may increase by the introduction of tax governance structures and frameworks. So like transparency and disclosure requirements, effective strategies, and tax governance approaches. And this is in the sense that companies who build proper brand value in terms of efficiency criteria will get invited into tax policy discussions and be able to use their influence to essentially craft legislation related to these topics, which the industry will eventually have to follow no matter what. And that will provide them with the use of tax incentives to increase their valuations, reduce tax risks, and decrease their insurance premiums. As ESG as a value driver, sound real estate ESG strategy can turn sustainability into a real estate driver. Management of risks across the supply chain via sustainable construction and building certification opens attractive financing conditions and market access within a larger pool of capital. There are increased opportunities for growth and strengthened reputation, especially now that environmental and social issues have become a public and political priority. This priority increases hype, and that hype may have value for investors. As a result, identification and management of potential ESG impacts may protect portfolios and guard against obsolescence and value erosion.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. I know that we put a lot of information out there and a lot of useful information. So now's the time, like, feel free to, unmute yourself, ask any questions, talk about this this increasing, ESG situation with us. Like, we're really excited to hear what you guys have to say.
Well, I guess I could go first. I like the presentation a lot. That was really insightful. My question is though, like, since how fairly new is this concept of like ESG?
So it's fairly new. ESG's been around for a little while, but it's really starting to generate hype like right now over the last few years. I think the Davos, the World Financial Conference in Davos was actually in 2020. So this thing has been at the forefront of business for a little while, but the regulatory aspect of it is barely starting to kick up steam, mostly because of the Paris Agreement and
Yeah.
the climate change. The climate change regulations are barely starting to be crafted right now,
Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
lot of it is happening in Europe. So it's gonna come here eventually. So that's why it's really important for business leaders to start getting involved now, so that they can help craft legislation that's beneficial for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was curious about, since, they're still making regulations for it. That's where it's like, okay, how can I, as a real estate agent, sort of help in the process of that, like maybe hiring certain contractors that have a specialty in like environmental science or something, if that's even a thing out there. But no, yeah, like really interesting stuff. I'm all for it.
Yeah, there's actually engineering and architectural initiatives that are coming from like the material sciences, the surveying science. I mean, it's kind of difficult here because ESG is kind of seen as like a buzzword still, but a lot of things are seen as buzzwords before they get really popular, and people who are proactive or get in early, it's like getting into like a stock really early before it blows up, and then that's where you make like a significant amount of return, is being a visionary, I guess.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
it'd be, oh, go for it.
oh no, sorry. And the really cool thing is that there are a lot of architect firms that are interested in, or urban planning firms that, are really looking into this ESG matter. Like, for example, if you guys have gone to the Brick, that was made by an architecture firm that's whole mission is less is more. So they find, um, every single thing that they use, they find as much, like they find every single possible way to use it without having to buy more, because they want to make the most out of every material they have. And so, yeah, a lot of firms are getting into that, with affordable housing and, sustainable housing. So it's on the come up, and a lot of companies have been doing it, but it's just really about, asking that question to yourself of like, okay, I have like, it's like the design process, asking yourself those questions at the beginning, like before you step foot into it, like, how can I make that difference? Or what companies do I need to be a part of that are talking about ESG and talking about environmental sustainability? And so that's kind of like where that comes from.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky for now, since like you said, it was new. There's still haven't really formed regulations around it, like what's safe and what's not. But yeah, no, I feel like, I don't know, maybe if like some organizations become advocates for it and really show or serve as a prime example that it can work, I feel like, up until that point, it'll be more than a buzzword, and it'll be almost like the standard to be environmentally friendly all around. So yeah, no, it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, a lot of the regulations are essentially trying to influence the design stage, because
Yeah.
that's really where most of it comes from. It's like, how is the building going to be designed, you know and the thing is that if we actually want to meet the climate change, like metrics that were set by the Paris Agreement as a world, I mean, you saw like 40% of emissions come from the use of buildings, and
Mhm.
that's like either directly or indirectly. So an indirect way, it's like, if they're running their AC all day long, or if somehow some buildings are only used during the day and not at night, so they turn off their AC when everybody leaves, and then they crank their AC in the morning in order to cool the building down.
Mhm.
Like that kind of stuff, it's like it leads to indirect emissions because they're using a lot of energy. So if they were
Mhm.
to implement like even like smart ventilation systems that it doesn't necessarily keep it running the whole night, but it kind of like checks out certain parts of the building, and then it keeps the temperature controlled so that the AC isn't like being run super hard all at once.
Yeah, like not
Even
constantly
yeah,
blasting. Yeah.
yeah. So even stuff like that, just essentially what it is, it's like a combination of science and business.
Mhm.
So the use of automation in general and stuff like that, like robotics, it's going to be a big thing
Yeah.
within the next few years. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to meet those climate change goals.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
Because I know one of my floor mates here, he's a landscape architecture, and I like saw that he had this book, and it was like I think it was like an architecture book where it was like it showed like sustainable buildings. It's like the buildings that had like plants on the side or something like that. And there's even some like very weird ones where it was like there's like built into a tree or something like that. Um, I don't think it'd be like we should like build buildings on top of trees or stuff like that, but it's just very interesting how like we could potentially shift it towards that, something more sustainable and that works better.
Yeah, there's like some building technologies that are trying to integrate carbon capture into the construction of a building that kind of like sucks CO2 out of the atmosphere. And
Yeah.
there's also buildings that are being constructed from the design stage to hold solar panels and stuff like that. So the real big issue though is that um, there's a lot of buildings still in use that weren't constructed with energy efficiency in mind. So smart cities like in Dubai, like they had the benefit of being able to design all this stuff from the ground up. So they're kind of like ahead. But as new construction, like as new build outs are being constructed, it'll get easier over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and hopefully like replace those buildings that aren't environmentally friendly. That'd be tough work though, since there's so many buildings out there, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think like something to add on to that is that with this whole idea of change and stuff, it's not about just, rapid and accelerated change or just change that's, so bold. It's about the little changes that make a difference. Like how we talked about with changing pre-existing buildings. We're not saying like, demolish the whole building and remake it again, because that also affects the climate, that affects the environment. So with that, like, just making those small changes, like, a lot of people started changing their light bulbs. That's one way to do it. The water system you use, like there's different pressures to it. Like, if you're like, how much water are you releasing in the tank and stuff like that. So there's different things that play into that. And it's really interesting to see how further and further deep you can go into.
Yeah, I also think it's really important to mention as well that, especially at the beginning stages, like ESG isn't something that could be like fanaticized about, because ultimately, we're finance majors, so we have to abide by valuation techniques. This is really about introducing everybody, like getting your feet wet into ESG and like seeing how the industry is moving forward, because as new tax governance starts to be released and regulations start to come out, all of those things are going to factor into valuations. So like while it is like a social and climate imperative, it's going to become a business imperative like soon enough.
Yeah, would you say it's
Yeah.
like similar to how the shift of like gas dependent cars to electric, like at first it was Tesla with their electric cars, but now it's like all these companies, car companies that we already know, like Ford, even luxury cars, like they're moving on to electric vehicles as well. So would you say it's like similar, like a non-efficient building, and now it's like everyone's going to start making more environmentally friendly ones?
Yeah, it's ultimately because like the example you use, how everybody's moving to electric, that's a good example, because it's like it's not just that they want to save the environment, it's just that that's where a lot of business analysts are seeing major growth opportunities, is in the electric space. So like as economies begin to change and as people become more conscious of certain things, they start to demand like new products and new services. And that's very similar to investors. Like investors will start to demand these initiatives, and they'll start to go with like companies that are building these kinds of brand. That's where the brand value comes from. It's like, who do you want to be known as? Do you want to be known as the company that proactively started this in the first place, or do you just want to be known as somebody who adopted it after it became popular? And that's kind of like what Tesla is, like Tesla is like big now because they were proactive during a stage when nobody believed that it was going to be feasible.
And now everyone's like following their example. which is
Exactly.
what I think Elon Musk wanted to happen anyways. So yeah, I think that's a good analogy.
Does anyone have any other questions or, just want to talk?
Where did you guys first hear about ESG?
I think like I learned about it at the company I was working with. I was working at Travelers Insurance as an underwriting intern, and that's kind of like where I first started to learn about it, just because they try to, like every company tries to put some efforts out there to fit with ESG or like, do something in terms of that. So like, I heard it a lot there. I heard it a lot of companies that, I was actively looking into to recruit for. And I think like, when you get more and more into real estate, you're like, wait, building places that causes a lot of CO2 emissions, that causes a lot of waste. So how does ESG play into that? How can you bring ESG into something that can accumulate so much or just, like can cause so much emissions, all these other things. So I think that's, and then like Martin and I were like, okay, what should we present? Like, what should we talk about with REA? And he was like, oh, why don't we talk about ESG and climate with real estate? And so that's how this came to be.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like topics like this, so that was a good one.
Yeah, it's ultimately too, like, investors also have to be worried about like extreme weather events that are coming. So it's in order to maintain the property value, because if say like they build a development or something in Miami or somewhere in Florida, and like sea levels start to rise, that causes an erosion of value. So there's a lot of like business things that really have to do with ESG beyond just trying to do the right thing or whatever. It's mostly just this is going to affect the business world, it's going to affect the finance world, and this is kind of like a way to start to think about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, right here, Martin. I just want to say, it was an incredible presentation that you did, and also, the topic was very interesting because, every single time I'm talking or thinking about real estate, the key role is climate change, and how we can help, like there are many factors that can cause a building or something like that. So I thought it was really cool. And I think about like 2-3 years ago, I used to work with World Bank Group, and also the Belgian government, in climate change project in Vietnam about 3 years ago. It was in the summer, and they were consistently talking about climate change and how does it affect all the projects that they do in construction and stuff like that. So I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, it's a big issue too, because like the materials have to be sorted. That's another reason why materials are try to be sourced as locally as possible, using like local labor and stuff like that, because like we're all in this together essentially now, we know. So, and climate change is something that even like the US military is looking at as well, in terms of like how it's affecting them, like because it makes everything more expensive, like having to deal with like having to mitigate a lot of the stuff. So that's why when we look at these valuations and we look at like the construction of buildings, the sourcing of materials, like how, like ultimately we need to make like the goal of a manager is to do the best that they can do with the limited amount of resources, and climate change makes it much more difficult and much more expensive. So yeah.
So are these buildings considered like smart buildings, similar to smart cars? Like it's more than just like putting plants inside a building and calling it a green building?
Yeah, so to speak, it has to do a lot with, what do they put into the building. And that can be with smart appliances, like we talked about the light switch, or like the Nest, the home like thermostat. That thing is very in tune with the area and that it's put into, to like make sure it regulates everything and all the temperatures. And so it is similar to smart cars where, it kind of has like a mind of its own, but it's using technology to, use less technology or just use less energy, so to speak.
The new homes, like that the builders are offering, have some of that, or it's different?
Yeah, so a lot of new constructions now are coming with home automation networks integrated like in the build, and that's actually going to become like an imperative, especially right now in the EU. That's one of the things that's going into the planning stages and design is they need buildings to be energy efficient from the start. So that includes things like home automation or things that can be controlled from a smartphone. Yeah, because like buildings before that, they really weren't used, and then there's a lot of like toxic materials that used to be used with construction just because it was cheaper. But now regulations are forcing construction and builders to rethink everything.
Yeah, because I went to see some model homes and I saw a lot of signs that they said eco-friendly, and they will point at all the things that they were like better than before. So that's why I was just asking.
Yeah, it's a newer thing. That's why it's good to get in like learn about ESG now, so that after we graduate and we go out and we go into businesses, we can present like new ideas and solutions that maybe they didn't see before, and make a lot of this stuff easier, because we're going to need to like as we showed in the presentation, a lot of buildings need to be renovated in order to meet like these climate change goals. So it's going to be a big thing coming up here soon.
Thank you.
Anyone have any more questions?
I have questions, but not regarding the ESG though, because I think I spoke to you yesterday about some of the stuff that
Nearing the end of like hours, so if we don't have any more questions or anything, like we're just going to end it here. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. It was great to have everyone listen in on our ESG presentation, and I really hope that everyone took something out of this meeting today to kind of think about their future in real estate, and just how can they incorporate environmental change, or social change, or even governance change in their everyday lives or in their companies that they're going to go into. So thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your days.
Thank you.